Good afternoon. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming. When I think about people who really care about Lake Forest history, Art Miller always comes to mind. I think I first heard about Art roughly 20 years ago. The Preservation Foundation was fighting City Hall, which wanted to cut off the historic gas lights to save money. And Art and the Preservation Foundation fought back and they raised enough funds so that the historic gas lights kept going, which was fascinating. Great group. Art has led the History Center, and I would venture to say no one knows more about Lake Forest College history than Art. He was the archivist there for decades, and one of his passions is architecture. And I was at a friend's house a few weeks ago, and we were talking about Lake Forest houses, and she showed me this book, and it was about an architect named Walter Frazier, and he's the guy who designed the show house that is on Lowell Avenue. And I look at the cover of the book, who's the co-author, Art. And anyway, that today we'll talk about his newest book, which also involves architecture in Lake Forest. So Art, take it away.
Thank you very much. Now I'm standing in the middle of this thing here because there's a little light that's leading to a Zoom connection, I guess, with this. So I'm trying to stay positioned right. There are sheets on the table that give some background about the project, but it was a joint effort of many people working. Marcy Kerr was very important in making it work out. The photography we're going to see is by a local treasure, Marcus Norman. Marcus is a designer and photographer. He works for, he does design work for the College of Lake County, but he's really did a great job. He's very dedicated to this project. Went out at dawn to take pictures all over town and things. So I think that's going to make it interesting. You'll see the pictures in the book, but we'll show some of them much larger. There were 261 sites that we settled on finally, representative, because obviously historic buildings within the districts and landmarks of Lake Forest number probably close to 1,000 or more. So this is a selection, representative, and this is the opening. This is the cover of the book. Okay, it shows two of the outfits that were sponsors of it, but also just leading well-known things. So it's Market Square, North Tower, that was done by Howard Edward Shaw on the wing, and the Deer Path Inn, based on a place in England, and that was a William C. Jones that was the architect for that in 1929. It burned, and then had to be rebuilt in the interior by Stanley Anderson. So these are some of our iconic buildings on the book. Now, if I'm going to push this right, let's see if this works. Okay, good. Now, this is a picture of the maps. Marcus Norman made this map also, and it shows the range of these historic districts with the black lines that you can see. The main Lake Forest district was created in the 1970s. The nomination was done in 1975, and it was approved in DC in 1978. And it's the East Estate area, basically, gerrymandering around some of the serviced neighborhoods. And it's in the first four chapters are basically mostly about that part of the district. Then later, the Green Bay Road District, a major district also, that was 1995 that was approved. There are some smaller ones. One is the Vine Avenue area. There's a little district down there that was done in 1980 as the condo buildings sort of started taking down some of the historic places. And then there was the kind of light purple one, I guess, is the first or the best existing support neighborhood in town that was led by Howard Edward Shaw. It's the West Park District, and then there's another district out west. That's was approved by the National Register, and that's the Democrat Hills Estates neighborhood. So we're going to see some examples of these things as we go through. Now it starts with this picture, which is important for two reasons. You have to think in terms of before Valencia and then after Valencia here, so it'll be like BO and then like they do town, but in the starting of Valencia is kind of a crucial factor in the 1890s. But this park is doubly significant. First, because it was the starting point for the plan of the community in 1857, when it was laid out by Bauer and Hotchkiss. It was the largest landscape in the state when it was done. And the start was the forest park that we saw earlier. And it was that picking out that place and dedicating it as a public spot in the 1,200 acre development with about 285 lots. Then the train station was put directly west of that. And along the way in the middle was the Academy campus. It's now part of Lake Forest College campus. So the park was the start, but it has another significance too. Oh, and this is the fellow who did that map we just saw. First published map of Lake Forest was in 1873, full-size publication. It was by Eli Lake Canfield. He was the real estate guy that published it in Chicago right after the fire, and he wanted to attract more people to Lake Forest. So this is his house. You've all driven by it. The Fred Wackers live there now. It was actually moved to this site. It's at 611 East Westminster, but it was moved from 600 Westminster when a house was built there in 1898. Okay, there we go. Now this fellow, this is the other significance of this. This is a fellow who was a witness of the first golf ball, long golf drive in the Midwest by Charles McDonald. And so the guy in the football uniform is Fred Hayner, Lake Forest University class of 1895, and he was there in 1892 when that drive took place. He was later a sports writer for different papers, but in 1914 he published an article in the Chicago Evening Post saying that this was the beginning of golf in the Midwest, and he witnessed it. So this course started in Forest Park. Now, by that time, also the town and the university had started as one thing. This is actually the second building for the Lake Forest Academy. It's now on the Lake Forest College campus. It was used for Academy boys from 1880 to 1893 until it moved to a bigger campus. And this is one of the graduates from that period, Clive Kahn, an alumnus of Lake Forest Academy. He was president of Valencia from 1913 to 1914. Built a lovely estate that's one of the few really still individually intact at the south end of Mayflower. This is a Presbyterian church. This is all before Valencia. This is 1887. It was built by Colin Frost, and it was the first stone building in Lake Forest. There was brick earlier, as we saw that building that was the Academy building was in brick, but this is the first stone building. It's actually a shingle style building, and it's one of the best shingle style buildings in the Midwest, recognized as such. Colin Frost were the architects. This is Henry Ives Cobb. He was a designer for this firm of two guys. They both were MIT graduates. Cobb came to town with Boston Brahmin sort of credentials, got jobs very quickly, and he brought somebody in to run the office, which was Frost, who knew something about how to run an office. Always got to have that. And Frost actually married the daughter of the president of the Chicago Northwestern Railroad, the middle daughter, Mary, in 1885, and then in 1887 built a wooden station in Lake Forest, the same time he did the church. And then later he came and lived here after 1898 for the next third of the century. I'm new to touchscreens, I guess. Okay, so this is the pastor of the Presbyterian Church. And Dr. James G.K. McClure. He came to the church in 1881 and was pastor until 1905. He also was multitasking as university president in the period he was downsizing from a university to a college in the period when John B. Rockefeller University of Chicago was trying to take the place over so it wouldn't be a competitor. So they downscaled to be below his vision. But what's interesting too about this is his great-great-granddaughter, Sage Lansing Dupre, is the spouse of the architect who's going to be doing leading the work that's going to be happening here fairly shortly, I think, on the club. So there's always a connection here. This is a house that Frost, I'm pretty sure, designed for the McClures and for the Mansfield Presbyterian Church, 1897. It's still there. And I think it's Frost because he built a house very much like this for his folks in Lewiston, Maine, the same year. This is the Senator Charles B. Farwell's home, just opposite Forest Park. If you were up in that building, you would have seen the view we saw of Forest Park earlier. This became half of the original golf course in 1892. His son-in-law, Howard Chatfield Taylor, had decided that it would be great to have something for the people to do that were coming from Britain to work on the World's Fair. Senator Farwell had led the floor fight to bring the World's Fair to Chicago against New York City. So he had an important interest in that fair also. Now this is showing some of the early golfers on that nicely mowed lawn of the Farwell estate. We can see there. This is 40 golfers. It was informal at that point. It was about 7 holes. This is a successor house on that site that we still see today, 965 West Deer Path. Delano and Aldrich, who were the leading in the period of traditional architects in New York, built this house or designed this house for Mrs. McGann, who was the daughter of Senator Farwell. Now, by the 50s, that house was being subdivided, the whole block there was being subdivided. And it was Farwell Winston who lived in this house, and he had taken a service block group and turned it into a house for himself in the 1920s with Stanley Anderson doing the design. So this was Farwell Winston's house who did that, managed to save that house. That's the point. This is Mrs. Farwell Winston in a publicity ad for the 1934 Lake Forest Garden Club Flower Show that was going to be held in Walden. And you can see that she's a regular gardener. This map is from the history yearbook, and it just shows the peregrinations of the golf club. From informally on the right up there next to the lake. Next it went to what's today the day school campus, and it was a part of the farm for Leander McCormick. And they set up a little bit bigger course there. I think Charles McDonald was still the person doing that design work. And then in December of 1895, after having played the 1895 season on that spot, they bought the Ellen State Club here. And by the late July of 1896, they were able to play golf here on this course that started then. Back at that McCormick Farm, this was called the Sheep Shed. And if you look closely at the lawn, it is quite getting the care that Senator Farwell's lawn was getting. Or if you're trying to play golf. These are some of the, I'm not sure when this picture was taken, but it's in that period and it shows a bunch of golfers all accumulated. So this was a really growing phenomenon, having this golf course. Here's Hobart Chatfield Taylor, married to Rose Farwell Chatfield Taylor. And he was the organizer of the club, as everybody knows. Now, this is Cobb home. He started in 1890, but he had so many projects. By that time, he no longer had Frost making sure that the projects were done on time, yet on budget. So he had to put off finishing his house while he did really too many projects for other people. And he sold it because he was moving east in 1896 and relocated to Washington, D.C. and New York City. This is Edward Bennett. Go back to the other one. In that attic up there, you see the door in the gable ends there. They were putting bachelors in the summer. So in 1897, the person who had started the plan of Chicago, Charles Dyer Norton, told Bennett that they were going to do this plan of Chicago, but they needed to really have the support of the Lake Foresters. And so he was going out there for the summer to live in the attic and meet everybody and sell the project. It's been, he later married Catherine Jones, David B. Jones's daughter, built this house in 1916 at the southwest corner of Deer Path and Green Bay Road. The wall went up in 1928, the same time that the Adler house with the clouds went up on the other opposite corner. This is Charles Dyer Norton's house. It's on the site of the 1905 burnt Sylvester Lynn house, but it was he built this with a Kew garden. But on the right, at the back of the driveway, you can see there's a garage or a stable, and that was where that was Sylvester Lynn's stable and probably part of the underground room. This is Charles Dyer Norton. He was a life insurance salesman, fantastic promoter of everything. By 1910, after the book came out the year before, he became the secretary to President William Howard Taft, in effect, chief of staff. And that didn't work very long. He's very progressive, Norton, and Taft turned out to be not progressive. So they went separate ways, but he left Lake Forest at that point and then did a plan in New York. Wrong dot. There. Okay, this house, now we're going back to close to the club. So we had that big rambling house across the road, which is now where we're standing. And this across the road was a farmhouse cobbled together from an old schoolhouse and an old post office. This became what's now James Sterling's house. There was also an addition made on it to the south in 1928 by Stanley Anderson. Beautifully been kept up. It has a magnificent garden that was designed by Ann Baker with Beatrix Friend, so top New York designer. This is John Andrews King, whose house it was. It is steeplechase costume for the club. And this is his wife, Thomas Indy's daughter, living on Astor Street. And she's probably standing in front of the Anderson Edition door. Another one from that same 1934 feature for this garden flower show. This is just south of the club's entrance. This house at 80 North Green Bay Road is Alden Swift's house, Louis Swift's son. And he had married a daughter of Austin Niblack, who was also a club member. This is a French house post World War I, built in the 20s by Edmund Hill Clark and another third person. And it is actually very similar to a farmhouse in Boulogne-sur-Mer in France. Would have been seen by a lot of people traveling from America to France for the unpleasantness of 1917-18. This is Mr. Swift, Alden Swift. And this house is the Hardman George Shaw house at 55 North Green Bay Road that you go by when you're going south. Maybe you see it through the driveway there. Lots of interesting stories about this house, but it's that kind of an interesting dual personality that's been kind of worked away from it now. It's got kind of an Italian, and that was true. It was a half Italian house and half a craftsman house. So the porch is partly a little bit of both. It's got Tuscan columns, but it has a shed roof for dormers and the porch. And there's a loggia on the second floor with pillars also. So this is a book plate that was done by Howard Van Doren Shaw for that house. It was a 1905 house. This is 1903 when they were planning it. It looks very Italian-y. We know it's Shaw because there are two arborvitaes on the two sides of the drawing. One has an H under it, and the other one has an S. So we know it's Howard Shaw. And it's for his client, Wallace de Wool. And up there is the motto, Latin motto, that basically means he who persists wins. Well, he was in a battle to try to take in his brother-in-law's General Telephone Company in that period into AT&T that was emerging as a big trust. And the brother-in-law was against it. And so it never did. It was actually the ones that brought the suit in 1987 to have to break the monopoly for AT&T. So all kinds of Wednesday history here. Wrong. Here we go. This is Mr. DeWolf. He later became a painter and painted this self-portrait, and that's his architect Howard Shaw. This is Ragdale Shaw's house, further up on North Green Bay Road. From his very start, before he was developed, he paid for his part of the farm by having two other clients that he built houses for just to the north on wooded parcels. This is the second generation on the right, Sylvia Shaw Judson, the sculptor. Those are her lambs in front from the World War II period when she was in the rationing period. They were raising their own food. But she's in her garden, and the garden still persists. Her daughter Sylvia left a covenant on the property that has the garden on it that they can never build a building. So it's still there. This is their barn house there, and this is a series of different kinds of adaptive reuse, but it's now headquarters for the Ragdale Foundation. It's owned by the city on a 99-year lease from 2000, and they are just doing major improvements on that property now. The Ragdale Foundation has really thrived, and the Lansings led in helping the Margaret Hart's descendants give or sell that property that she lived in it, 1272 North Green Bay Road, to Ragdale. It's a major upgrade for the residents that go there to be in that house, not in this park. I know that from personal experience. And this house was opened in March of 1859, March of 1859. It's now at 725 North Sheridan Road. It was originally at 644 East Deerpath. It was built as a boarding house for the academic students whose building was across the street. And by 1865, they expanded their building and it became redundant. And so one of the first secretary of the Lake Forest Association, David Lake, moved this house over to this location so that he could build the house that's on at 644 East Deerpath now. Now here's the house that some people here know. This is Gordon East, or better known as David Boyd's house for a good many decades. This is built in 1859. And it was built for Gilbert Rossiter, whose sister was married to Norman B. Judd. Norman B. Judd was campaign manager for Abraham Lincoln in 1860, either on the way to or from a talk or a campaign speech that Lincoln was making in Waukegan. They stopped here, and Pam has shown me evidence from connections out east about how this verifying all this. And she also had this, which is a picture of what it looked like before it was moved to that location. Used to face Deerpath. And here's an historic picture of that house on Deerpath. So thank you, David. Passing my thanks on to Pam. Now this is a nice. This is a nice late 20s house. built by Lindeberg, like where we are now, in the Lindeberg building. It was built for Robert A. Gardner when he was a kid, before he became a stockbroker in the late, and had a lot of money in the late 20s. He had been the youngest amateur winner, in golf amateur winner. And he kept his record for some time. Here's what he looked like. Well, this is Harrington Lindeberg, the architect. Now, this is what Gardner looked like as a youth before being a stockbroker. And here's the kid that took over, that was the next youngest one to come in. So many, almost a century of difference there. And the club, of course, was built in 1928. There are papers at the Griffith Grant and Plackey archives that show that they weren't able to get any insurance, fire insurance on that rambling big wooden house with people living in the attic. And so they had to tear it down and build a new club. And so they got Lindeberg, who was an expert, to do that. Here's the Deerpath Inn. It was same people building the club, built it with the stockholders for the Deerpath Inn. And they modeled this on, with their architect William C. Jones, modeled it on the Chittingworth old manor house that became an inn, built in Elizabethan times, and it looks remarkably like this. So we have something that's very historic. Also by Lindeberg in 1930 is this house further up on Lake Road. This is Dexter Cummings' house, and it's a remote French house. You can see the remnants of sort of pollard and trees. Some of us remember when they would cut those off in the spring, and so the new branches would grow out of the French manor. But it's a very formal French house. This is Dexter Cummings, another amateur champion. And he had a sister who was even more important, Edith, I think on the right. Edith Cummings, who was more famous, was on the cover of Time magazine and things golfer. This is another house with historic connections. This is at 901 East Rosemary. And it was owned by William Mitchell and his wife, Ginevra King Mitchell. And a decade before they were married, in around 1914, she had a friendship with F. Scott Fitzgerald. But what people don't know as much is they know that she inspired a lot of his writing, but she actually wrote a play that was turned out to be much of the dynamics of the books that he wrote later. It was people were doing line plays at that time at the Aldous estate, and Mrs. Shaw was doing it also. So Ginevra King really set up F. Scott Fitzgerald for what work he did, but she didn't pursue her walk career. It was in a book that came out in 2005, a copy of the play. This is the Bentley House at 1421 North Lake Road, next to the Bunn's house now. And this was a young couple, Richard Bentley, who was a 1922 Princeton graduate, and Phoebe Norcross, his spouse, Norcross Bentley. And they went to David Adler and said, "We would like you to build us an Italian villa." And he said, "Right, I've already done that. It's down the street at the Pike Estate. So I'm going to build you a Dutch house." And they said, "Okay." Now this is what they look like, and this is important. I thought this was an important thing to show. Again from that same garden club thing, 1934. But here she's digging in her garden that was laid out by Fletcher Steele, a famous East Coast landscape architect. But she looks like young people moving into Lake Forest in the last several years, just digging in literally to making their house the way they want it. And she's many of us remember Phoebe. How many of you all know Phoebe? Knew Phoebe Bentley, sure. And she was wonderful person, but I remember her as an older woman, and so it's fun to see what she looked like younger. David Adler, he was 20 years older. So if he told them they were going to have a Dutch house, not an Italian house, they would follow his advice. This is a house that was built by the Niblack's, Boston Niblack. And the left-hand part of this was done in 1910 or 12 by Chapman and Hammond, Chicago architects. It was later than added on to, I'm skipping one slide, you go to Mason Phelps, who was hired Stanley Anderson to add on to it the substantial west or the east part of that house that was going downhill. And a new owner has now put in a gate and changed the address actually. But the house is still in great shape and it still reflects important architects of a century ago. This is Stanley Anderson himself. His father had been early person in the support community in Lake Forest. Had leveled ground that's now Lake Forest College campus, and he was hired by that Lake Forest Association. And then when he came to finish the project and collect his money, they said, you know, we actually don't have the money. But we have on the west side of the tracks where nobody wants to build their house, we have a lot of land that we can't use. So we would like to share it with you. It ran from Vine Avenue on the south to the middle of Market Square on the north and then west further. So there's still Stanley Anderson's daughter, Sarah, and they're still living in San Francisco at about 90 years of age, is still collecting coupons based on that trade when they couldn't afford to pay them. Because they had they owned shares in Market Square, they had all this kind of where the bank is built and all. So Stanley Anderson was a member of this club. As a third generation, his architecture practice was very successful. And this was his house on Burger Lane in the Deer Path Hill Estates neighborhood. It hadn't been built as such. It was built for a fellow named Starkweather, 1929. But the whole development, Deer Path Hills Estates, went south in 1930. And by 1931, Anderson, who also couldn't get paid, just like his grandfather couldn't get paid, took this in trade. And this is the house that he took. It's interesting again for another version of that French plan, but the inside layout is very similar to the Ragdale plan. So he obviously had worked for Shaw in the early 20s and really liked Ragdale and recreated that same floor plan for his own house. Back east to the center of town, Frost had built a train station in 1807. It was a wooden station. A couple of things came together, so they built a new station in 1900, not very long later. First of all, in August of 1899, an interurban went through trolley level train, kind of a second-class train, which meant that they could build a new first-class train for the Wednesday crowds that were arriving on the weekends. And they needed lots of space. And you probably will know the horse shows here brought in 15,000 people, for an event by later, a few years later. So to accommodate these crowds, they built this station with two waiting rooms. On the right is the women's waiting room, and on the left the men's. This station was started in March of 1900 and completed by November 15th. And that just sort of takes your breath away. Nobody can build anything that fast anymore, But it was, the funds were raised for people in Lake Forest, which meant it was basically Lake Forest on Western Line that built the station. The half timbering is from his new partner, Alfred Granger. And Granger's house has that same kind of on Sheridan Road, has the same features. And so this was the 1904 completed Anderson's block. It was done by James Gallo Rogers, who did the Northwestern Library on Sheridan Road and Yale University's campus and things like that. But he married a Lake Forest girl, and so early on he built this building. The year after the McMillan plan of 1902, that Burnham had done, and Rogers had worked for Burnham, and so this is much like the kind of buildings they were projecting for Washington, D.C. at the time. This is Market Square. After they built after some money had gone together to lay out the West Park subdivision, as those people paid off their debts in 1912, the estate owners built bought a bunch of land that was across from the train station and then got ready to develop Market Square. Actually, it took them 3 plans to come up with one that was viable. There were no real deductions back then for real estate, and so they had to promise their investors that they would get 4%. So this is a third plan, and you see it has it's a longer stretch of Western Avenue, kind of a ballooning out of Western Avenue that makes the plan, like we see here. And this is Alice Neely's drawing from 1982. It shows the old original elm trees that were there that all bush out over the second story. And these died out. The last 2 were taken out in 2000, and the trees, they're kind of bushy trees there now, so you can't see the architecture as well, especially after the leaves come out. This is the way Shaw envisioned it. This is the 1916. He wrote a little article about it and told the engraver, obviously, what he wanted the rendering to show. Let's see, the trees are way up high. Now, the backers for that were Cyrus McCormick Jr., who had the Walden estate. This is the developer of like the Monadnock building and things downtown, Arthur Aldous, and the master of the hunt at the Wednesday Club and an early president of the club in the early 1900s. And the third developer was John Griffith, who was the local real estate person, and he put together a lot of the estates. And he kept telling them, "You're making plans that won't sell. You won't get your income out of it." So it took him. He actually was the one who drove it to be the way it looks today. Now, this is from a 1931 Wesleyan handbook. Who were the people that were the officers of the club in 1930? It was Thomas Joseph M. Cudahy, and then A.B. Dick Jr., and William B. Clow Jr., and Richard Mavitz. So these are people that I just show quickly their houses. This is Cudahy's house. He was married to Jean Morton Cudahy. Adler built this as their step down from a bigger place out west of where Fort One is now. They built this as a step down, it's called empty nester house on 3 or 4 acres. This is William Clow's second house, and this marvelous house is on 111 East Ridge Lane, and he has a Viennese secessionist Joseph Hoffman designed garden fence around the courtyard, and then a Georgian, sort of modernist Georgian house behind it. This is the only side of the property that was useful for an entry. Every other side had issues, traffic on Green Bay Road and Deer Path, and there was a noisy school up on the east. So Adler was excellent in taking and making gold from straw. Clow later, with second wife, owned Twin Doors, which is on the southwest corner of Wesley and Green Bay Road. This is one of the 2 houses. They face each other at the same entrances. This was by Anderson again, 1935. This is Mavitz's house, and this is on Vine Street. He had Stanley Anderson modify what must have been a Queen Anne house from early in the century for an Anderson family member. And it's just been rehabbed again in recent years. It's 1 door in from Green Bay Road by the street. But now this is, I don't know if Clifford Leonard was actually a member of the club or not, but on the west side we have some unusual places. This one, if anybody has been watching the Marie Antoinette story on PBS, she built a little play farm on the back corner of Versailles. And this seems to be modeled on that by the architect Ralph Varney for Clifford Leonard in 1925 as part of a farm. It's now a house, but it's one of the more remarkable residential places in Lake Forest. And finally, I'll end with showing a local district or a local landmark, which is the Elm Farm. And this picture was taken by Marcus Norman, and I was along with him when we took this from looking from the flower gardens at the top of the hill down toward the whole building that spread out for the Georgian farm group that was built for A. Watts Armour, a member of the club, and his descendants too are members of the club. It was 1915 by Albert Hopkins from New York City, who specialized in stables. And so, with that note, I will say thank you very much for being a patient audience. And I appreciate your attention. Thank you.
You want to answer any questions or?
No results. Well, that's why I'm in your house. Remarkable recall. Thank you, thank you. Well, obviously, I could be here all afternoon showing the different, however, the connections to the club. Basically, Lake Forest was the club. In those early days, there was a sport community also. I don't have pictures of that in this particular talk, but there's a whole chapter on that West Park neighborhood, which is an amazing stable area. And it was all laid out by Shaw. And then there was it was from the Anchorage farm. And Shaw bought that farm or had to put a consortium together that bought the farm, built 6 estates on the west side of the road, and then put a park in as a buffer, and then built a neighborhood over there to for people who were middle-class storekeepers and different things in town. And what was interesting about that, and it isn't really having to do with Valencia, except that the people that were members of the Valencia all voted in Chicago. They lived in Chicago in basically mid-November to mid-April, and they voted downtown usually. So, but the people who lived in Lake Forest and lived on the estates, they didn't necessarily vote Republican. In fact, in 1904, on the ballot had been Eugene Debs on the socialist ticket. And I think they thought that it would be really great to have more middle-class housing in Forest. And so we started to see a lot of that being promoted in that period. And so that's how that came about. Because the young men, only people who could buy lots in that neighborhood were members of the Young Men's Club, which had been started in 1905. And then Shaw laid out the subdivision in 1906. And then they sold the lots in 1907, and they had to pay them off by 1912. It was no interest loans for them to buy their properties. Thank you.
Great job. We'll look at a lot of these houses, fresh eyes, no doubt, especially David's. So thank you so much. Great presentation. I believe there's still books available if anyone wants them. So thanks for coming.
Buy them and give them away.
Makes sense.
And the guy's picture.
Right, thank you.
So thanks for. Thanks for work. Thank you very much.
Well, it started, just had this.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, people have it. Process and see why.
Yeah, oh, great time. That's. Ranger. Thank you very much. Yes. Yes, I. That's covered. It's all that traffic, very traffic. Oh, yes, yes, it's unbelievable. That's it has to read my person line to book. Okay, maybe I did it. So that's a fair. I think I did the post office there. What's
That's great saying. I'm so glad you've done it all. Really, oh, well, it's easy, but looks, yeah, I think it's, it's like. It was. See, start. Okay, here are the verses. No, first, it's lower. It's, you. Oh my God, it's too late. We find you again before you. Hey, I give it back to you. That's right here. I'm gonna go get a book. Like, see you later, everybody. So, thank you. That's a great. Thank you. Thank you. We're gonna put it, we're gonna cut this down to smooth. This. We got to record or no? It's close. We just got to share and. I know. Yeah. Well, I did a lot of poet plans, but I was living in.